Welcome again to everyone. Good day to you or good evening. Lovely to see you, to be practicing together. Just to mention again in English, I suppose, in case there is anybody who is looking for Spanish interpretation, you can click the button for that. And Claudia, our good friend Claudia, is going to be offering that Spanish interpretation. So this evening, this is the Tuesday Tune-In program, and we're going to be doing our usual format. And that means a bit of meditation to start out with, some guided meditation. And then I'll move into offering a Dhamma talk. And toward the end, we'll have time for comments and questions and some announcements. So at this time, I would like to offer a metta meditation this evening. I'm going to do some meditation on universal kindness or loving kindness, as it's often translated. And in order to do that, before I begin the actual guidance, I'm going to say, in order to do that, what's helpful is to take a moment now and to see about whether you can find an image that reminds you of kindness or sparks the quality of kindness in you. So just take a moment to think about what kind of image or phrase reminds you of kindness. So the sentiment is, may that being be well. I've recently, around the vihara here, been having some encounters with a bunny. That always makes me think of kindness. So I'll be quiet for a moment and allow you to just think about what kind of image or phrase sparks that quality in your heart, that uplifted, regular, everyday, simple, mundane kind of kindness. All right, so you've had a moment or two to think about that, and there'll be a little bit of time during the actual meditation as well. So if you haven't quite found something yet, maybe it'll come to mind as we get involved in sitting. So for now, you can begin to just feel the weight of the body on your seat. Allowing the belly to soften and relax so that the body can settle right here in this place. And coming into an upright posture to allow lots of room for the breath to breathe the body naturally. And now calling to mind an image that sparks the quality of kindness. Might be a kitten or a squirrel, the face of a friend, a baby laughing, some image that reminds you of kindness. And kindness has a pleasant feeling. It uplifts the mind. So you can imagine that quality of kindness as a light, and that light naturally shines in all directions. And it begins to fill your body. At any time, it's okay to go back to the image and remind yourself of that quality. And if you envision the light, you might use your breath as a support. So the light getting brighter with each in-breath. And naturally, slowly flowing in all directions and filling your body with each out-breath. The light of kindness getting a little brighter with each in-breath. flowing, gently carried by each out breath. And eventually that light of kindness, as it grows stronger and brighter, it begins to flow out beyond your body, flowing in front of you. No need to push or strain in any way. Just letting the breath nourish the light and help it to flow. The light also flowing to the right of you. And the light flowing behind you. That lovely light of kindness. And flowing to the left of you, light of kindness, still nourished by the breath. And flowing even beneath you, the light of kindness. And that light flowing up through your body and above you. And now taking a moment to observe the quality of the light of kindness. Just noticing whether it has any shape or any color. Whether the mind feels vast or constrained. Just noticing the qualities that you observe. Wonderful. So as usual, before I begin the Dhamma talk, I would like to pay homage to the Buddha and the Triple Gem. And you can feel free to join, follow along. And please keep your mics muted for folks who are online. We're going to do that. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Oftentimes, when folks come to talk to me about their practice, one of the things that they mention is that they would like to be able to improve their concentration. They'd like to be able to experience the mind. Sometimes they don't even use that word, concentration, but what they're talking about is wanting to be able to experience the mind that is settled and clear and focused. And I think many people come to meditation with that hope that meditation can help them to settle their minds or to have some experience of more clarity, more understanding about their own minds. And there are various ways to think about how to do that. So meditation can most definitely lead to experiences of the settled mind or the focused mind. And there are various methods for doing that. But tonight I want to talk about something that is not exactly a method, but that the early Buddhist suttas mention as supports for the development of right concentration, or concentration that can lead to great clarity, actually absolute peace and clarity. So for that, I brought, as usual, a particular sutta, actually two of them, as usual. And so I just want to talk a little bit about these two suttas and about how it might relate to personal experience. And somehow it turns out, so this is the period of time for Theravada Buddhists called the Vassa, the rains retreat. We have been having our fair share of rain, I suppose, but it's not really about the climate here. It is just a tradition that certain lineages, you could say, or certain schools of Buddhists don't do much travel during this period of the summer and actually kind of settle down and often do a bit more study or more intense practice. And so last year I was studying this book, the Middle Length Discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, as it's called in Pali. And turns out that this year, this is also the theme. So this primary sutta that I want to speak about today is Middle Length Discourse number 117, for folks who might want to go and look it up. And I'm not going to go through the whole discourse, but I just want to speak a little bit about this first piece of it. So it's the Buddha, and he's at the Jeta Grove, and that was in a park. It was like a meadow in a park that had been given by this person, this lay person, who's very impressed with the Buddha, Anathapindika. And in any event, he was there. It was a place where he gave many, many teachings. And he said, "Oh, okay, folks, bhikkhus," which means the monks. And usually that term, just in the same way that sometimes we talk about mankind, and that means all humankind, including women and folks who might identify with other genders. Oftentimes when it says bhikkhus in the discourses, it just means all of the ordained sangha, including the women, ordained women who would have been there. So he says, okay, noble right concentration. What is noble right concentration, and what are its supports? So I'm going to teach you about that, he says. And right away, we notice this word noble, because that doesn't always necessarily go together, that phrase. He's making this distinction between concentration, which is literally dignified, but which leads forward on, or you could say is an aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path, the full path of awakening that he taught. And this word right is a translation of the Pali word samma. Samma is the Pali word. And it's in English, it's translated as right. And we might be careful about what we mean by right. Right means something like the appropriate one, or it means also like the way that I often say it is sound. Like when we say that's a sound decision, something which is going to work well. That's what we mean by this word right or samma. So noble right concentration. So concentration which is appropriate to the path and which is a support on the path or fulfilling the path of awakening. And he says, I'm going to tell you what the supports are. And then he says, the supports are the other 7 factors on the Noble Eightfold Path, the other 7. So right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness. But then he says immediately after that, so then he's kind of saying, well, the whole path is really the support for concentration. And okay, that's a helpful thing, but we need a little bit more specificity than that most of the time. So in this case, and he didn't always do that, but in this particular case, he does go ahead and give some more specific information. And this next line is key. And this is why I brought this sutta today, because he says, right view comes first. And he repeats that over and over again in this sutta. Right view comes first. So now just that admonition right there, I'm going to set my book down and say, just that advice right there is a very interesting one for us. If you want to have a mind that is settled, that is focused, that is clear, then you need to begin with right view. Mm-hmm. So you need to begin with a way of seeing the world, which is the appropriate view. And what is the appropriate view? He tells us, one understands wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view. Mm-hmm. And then he says, what is wrong view? Wrong view is thinking, among other things. I'm not going to go through in great detail all of this, but he says, for example, there is no result of good or bad actions. That is wrong view. And right view is understanding that there is a result of good and bad actions. So the to paraphrase this, the way that I understand what the Buddha is saying here is that we begin to establish our clarity of mind by knowing that what we do matters, that what we do really matters. And when the Buddha uses this word action is actually kamma or karma in Sanskrit. And he would speak of action. So usually when we think action, we mean like doing something, like you dig a hole or something like that, bake a cake. But when the Buddha spoke about action, he spoke about actions of body, speech, and mind. So it's not just an outward doing, like digging a hole or baking a cake, but it's also what you say. It's also the way that you think about the world. So clarity of mind and settling of mind begins with this understanding that what we're doing with our minds and our bodies is what makes a difference between being agitated and being clear, or being agitated and being settled. So we start with that knowledge, you could say. We start with that ability to discern. Yes, actions have results. Actions have results. And what's the alternative view to that? So there, you might think, well, that's pretty obvious. What's the alternative view to that? But I remember at one point in my life and holding a view that I have heard many other people espouse, which is, 70% of life is random. But actually, the Buddha is saying that that's not actually true. That what we do makes a difference, that it actually shapes our future. That is the understanding of right action. And that's there were various views in the time of the Buddha about what constituted right action, or rather, what do we mean when we say that action has results? There were some schools of thought, and one of the reasons why he's bringing this up is because there were schools of thought of people who said, it doesn't really matter what you do. There are also contemporary Western philosophers who have said such things, right? It doesn't matter what you do. And there were other schools of thought where there was an understanding that the effects of even accidental stuff would come back on you, or would have a sort of karmic effect. And the Buddha said, no, that's not really where you need to put your focus, because what's actually being missed there is the aspect of intention, and how intention actually is what's driving that process. So he goes on to say, and I'm hopefully going to give you another example in a moment, but for now, he goes on to say, so what is right view? Goes on to define right view, and he says there are two different kinds of right view. And again, he's making these distinctions that are very important for us to understand in terms of our everyday life and how we're thinking about practicing this. So he says there's right view that is affected by greed and confusion, and there is this attachment to merit, to good stuff, generating good stuff in the future. And then there is right view, which is noble and which is a factor of the path. So he starts to talk about distinguishing these two things. And this is also a very important thing. So part of the message here is that you can practice for things that will benefit you in this life and at some point in the future, potentially beyond this life, if you believe in that, which I do, but some people don't. And I just want to acknowledge that that's okay. That is something you can continue to practice with, that belief. But there is practice which is aimed at making this life better and making the future better. And that is efficacious. That actually is true. That actually will work. And that actually can be a motivator for bringing us to the practice. And he says, and there is the view of practice which is about completely transcending that, completely transcending life itself, completely transcending all of the wants or needs or hopes or aspirations to come to a place of ultimate peace, absolute peace. Not that you die, right? It's not about transcending life itself in that way, but that you come to a place of peace rather than a place of trying to set up another outcome. And that's just another aspect of the path. It's not to say, again, that both things are not necessary. For most of us, both of those two things are necessary. So he says, again, right view, which is sometimes affected by greed or by some kind of confusion or by some kind of attachment to this way that it's going to make things better, would still include the right view of understanding that there are results of our actions. So that's good. It means that having that understanding will help actually unfold those kinds of beneficial results that we want to see. But then again, he says, and then there is the right view that is noble, that is a factor on the path. And what is that right view? He says it's the faculty of wisdom. So he names 4 things here: the faculty of wisdom, the power of wisdom, investigation of states or qualities, and then the factor of right view, the basic right view, as it's applied by someone who is developing the path. So these are the 4 things. So you have to ask yourself, okay, so wisdom, now he's saying that wisdom is an aspect of right view. But we thought that the path was about developing wisdom, right? So how does that happen? How is that wisdom can be one of the factors? And so he names these two kinds of wisdom. He calls the faculty of wisdom and the power of wisdom. And so there are two sets of qualities that are said to be helping us to develop awakening, the faculties and the powers. And these are things that he said that all of us were actually endowed with, and we just needed to learn how to use them. And wisdom is one of them in each of these two sets of 5 things. So you have to ask yourself then, what is that wisdom that we already have that becomes a factor for the development of ultimate wisdom, of ultimate insight? So for that, you have to look at another sutta. So this is a sutta from the Connected Discourses. There's a whole chapter, by the way, on these faculties. And you don't have that one, Claudia, because I'm only going to read one sentence from there. There's a whole chapter on these faculties, which is the 48th chapter in the Connected Discourses. So I'm looking at number 9 from the 48th chapter, which is an analysis of those 5 faculties. He just defines what they are. And so here he gives a definition of the faculty of wisdom. What is the wisdom which the Buddha said was something that we already had available to us? He says, wisdom which is directed to arising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative, leading to the complete destruction of suffering. This is the faculty of wisdom. So wisdom directed to arising and passing away, which is noble. Again, noble is always an indicator that it's being put in the service of the path of awakening. That's one way to think about what this word noble means. It's being applied toward the path of awakening and not applied to some other sort of worldly aspiration. And penetrative, this penetrative, profound, precise knowing of arising and passing away of phenomena. So when it's described that way, then it's clear, yes, we have that capacity. We have that within us. We can see arising and passing away in every instant of our lives if we're attentive to that. In fact, I would say it's inescapable. It is the thing that often brings us to the practice, that we see something arising or something passing away in such a strong way that it moves us to say, I need to better understand this life. I need to better be able to practice with this mind. Knowing of arising and passing away is something which is absolutely accessible to us. So that's why he calls it a faculty. We have that faculty. He also calls it a power. So a power is just another way of relating to it, he said. It's not that one is more developed than the other. It's just another way of relating to it. So you might think, oh, that's my superpower. That I can see arising or I can see passing away in this moment. So that is an interesting definition of wisdom because it brings us back to the fact that our whole lives are demonstrating wisdom. Everything that we can see that is arising and passing away is demonstrating wisdom. So that's the first of the definitions there of wisdom as a faculty, and it's also the second definition of wisdom as a power. Those two are similar, very similar. And then this third definition that he gives of wisdom, the wisdom that is right view, that is the kind of right view that actually serves as a factor for awakening. He says it is investigation of states, and he specifically names it that it is the particular investigation of states that is an enlightenment factor. So this is this word states is dhammas, dharmas, or dhammas, and so investigation is itself also wisdom. Yeah. Investigation is itself also wisdom. And now investigation, again, I would say, is a quality that we all have some capacity for. We all have a bit of that. But one of the things that you can see in the path of your practice, I would propose, is that capacity for investigation can develop in very profound ways. And there can be sudden moments of noticing something, of seeing a shift in your ability to investigate, or it can be something that kind of develops gradually, and you look back and you go, oh, wow, now I can observe such and such a phenomena or a particular tendency in my body or in my mind that I wasn't able to see before. So that we can also have that gradual experience of the development of investigation. And sometimes it's the small things. It's the small things that are really the important moments. The small things that bring up those aha moments, those moments of recognition. So just yesterday, was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. I was on YouTube and I was watching an interview. And it was an interview of two monks. Bhante Kovilo was interviewing Bhante Gunaratana. So Bhante Gunaratana is 95 years old, or maybe he's had his birthday already this year, 96, somewhere in there. And Sri Lankan monk who lives just about an hour and a half from the vihara here in West Virginia at a monastery there. Very well known. He's written some very popular books. And Bhante said, Bhante Gunaratana, Bhante Ji, as he's known affectionately, fondly, Bhante Ji said, yeah, if I walk over to the meditation hall, and as I'm walking over to the meditation hall, I look down and I say, why did they put this flower pot here? What is this flower pot doing here? He says, then that's my dukkha. I see that. That's my dukkha. Right? So it was a very beautiful moment of him talking about his investigation, his very precise, right, I see this thing. If you've been to Bhavana recently, they put this big seated Buddha outside. And then, so the big seated Buddha is kind of on this pedestal that's maybe, 4 or 5 feet high. And then they've put flower pots all around it. And they're constantly rearranging the flower pots. So he's talking about something quite literal that happens in his day-to-day life, right? So he notices that he has that observation. He notices that it's dukkha for him, right? He notices that then he has a laugh about it. He could talk to Bhante Kovilo about it, right? Because why? Because his faculty of investigation based on mindfulness is there. So when that arises for him, he can see. Oh yes, if I don't like where the flower pot is and I set myself against that, then that's going to be dukkha for me. Or another example that I have that I've sometimes shared with you about investigation is when I actually started to notice, with some clarity, the distinction between mindfulness and investigation, these first two factors of awakening. I was on retreat and I was sitting there on the deck of the little hut. It was like a little one-room hut where I was doing a 3-week solitary retreat. And I looked out of the deck and I was just looking at the tree there. And because it was a cloudy day, then I was looking at the tree, and then the clouds parted, and it got very sunny all of a sudden. And then I noticed, oh, the tree suddenly had this big shadow, this long shadow. And then again, the clouds closed up again, and it was overcast. And so there wasn't enough light for the shadow. And so the tree again was without the shadow. And in that moment, I noticed, right. So mindfulness just sees the tree. Mindfulness is this very kind of receptive form of attention. And it's just present with whatever is there. It's different from investigation in that investigation can see, oh, when there is this condition, then there is that thing. And when that condition goes away, then that thing also goes away. So when I noticed that there was a shadow, and then there wasn't a shadow, I was able to also say, oh, that's happening because there was enough sunshine. And when there's sunshine, then there was shadow. And when there's not enough sunshine, then there's no shadow. So that is investigation. Investigation is able to compare different states, which mindfulness doesn't do that kind of comparing, or to notice the specifics, conditions that are present at the same time and start to determine whether they are related. So that is the kind of investigation which leads to right view and is a kind of wisdom, right? Again, the arising and the passing seen in a noble, penetrative way, right? So it is this kind of activity that can help us to develop our concentration. And we should know that in itself is a kind of wisdom. So you can do this other practice called pamoja, and pamoja is, I call it the pat yourself on the back practice, because it's a kind of joy that arises from your own practice, from knowing when you make good choices, or when you're practicing well, or you're keeping your commitment to yourself, and those kinds of things. That kind of pamoja, that kind of joy can arise. And so I really want you, when you see arising and passing away, which is not always pleasant, at a minimum, you could acknowledge that that is a skill that is actually helping you to develop and use your wisdom. And as you develop and use your wisdom, then that helps you also develop your right view. So then the process, what we're seeing is the gradual nature of the path. So you have to have a little bit of right view to get started. You have to have at least some idea that this might be helpful in order to even get started. But then what's happening is that the Buddha is saying, and through this process of investigation, through this process of observing what's happening, how things actually work, then your right view, your ability to understand how your actions matter, how your actions have impacts, that is developing over time. It's getting more and more honed. It's getting more and more clear and strong. And that brings confidence, and that brings also a more settled mind, because the mind is able and willing to stay with change. Because ultimately, one of the most important experiences that we can have is to notice impermanence. The Buddha said it's one of the most powerful practices, is to actually be willing to train the mind to be willing to see impermanence very deeply, very clearly, very pervasively throughout. And to know also that, just to keep going all the way to the end, so this noble right view, this right view which becomes a factor toward ultimate peace, right? That is because by observing the conditioned phenomena, by observing phenomena that are arising and ceasing, both in this body and in this mind, and externally, the way that this body and mind are interacting with so-called external things, then we can also eventually allow all of that to fall off and experience the unconditioned nirvana, that which does not arise or cease. The Buddha said very clearly, there is something which doesn't arise and cease, but it is only by investigating that which does arise and cease that we can ultimately learn to let go of that enough to have that ultimate experience of release, the absolute bliss of total release. So that's the big picture. That's the big picture of how it is that that we can begin to develop concentration, put in place the factors, the supports for concentration to just start to develop naturally, and for wisdom to start to develop naturally, so we can start to put these supports into place. And finally, I want to say this. I want to say that later on in this same sutta, this middle length discourse 117, the Buddha speaks about right effort. And so he says, right here at the end of the section, on the first section on right view, he says, one makes an effort to abandon wrong views and to enter upon right view, and that is one's right effort. So mindfully, you let go of wrong view. Mindfully, you enter upon, you abide in right view. That is your mindfulness. And so he says, these work together. These work together. So it's a really good way to think about right effort. We often hear about right effort in terms of like striving or in terms of what's wholesome or not. But here the Buddha is saying, be willing to let go when you find yourself wrong. That is also part of right effort. Be willing to notice your mistakes. And when you find the mistakes in your views, or when you see that things don't work the way you thought they did, then really be willing to take that in. That is right effort on the path. That is such an important attribute. If we look around our world today, we can obviously, I think all of us say, it would be really good if we can all take that up. That we let go of wrong views when we find them in ourselves. And we really try to accept, acknowledge, practice with, live with the right view when we find it in ourselves, the clarity, the wisdom. So thank you for your kind attention this evening. That's what I wanted to share.